Tina Huang, and she's going to talk to us about how to learn to code with project ideas. Now, Tina is a data scientist currently working at one of the FANG companies in tech. Previously, she interned at Goldman Sachs and worked a couple of years in bioinformatics cancer research. She's also a content creator focused on data science, learning, and productivity. I'm really excited to bring Tina up on our stage here. Tina, welcome to the show.
Let me unmute myself.
Oh, perfect. I can hear you now. I can see you. This is great.
Excellent. We're off to a good start. Let's just keep it rolling.
Yes, let's keep
Thanks
that
so much for the introduction.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to hop off the stage and let you take it away.
Okay, cool. You can see my presentation as well. Amazing. All right. Yeah, so thanks so much for the intro. In this talk, I was watching a few other ones previously, and it was very interesting to me because I come from more of a technical background. So it's more like, for me, business is what I've been learning more about, and more like the coding and technical stuff is where I got more of my official training from. So it's been really, really interesting. So what I'm going to talk today about is how to learn to code. I'm going to give you guys some project ideas to go along with it. All right, so first thing I want to talk about is why you should learn to code. So this is something that, I feel like I don't have to talk too much about. A lot of you guys here are interested in data science. You guys are into data. So, coding is something that is almost like a natural extension to that. But there is one point that I do want to emphasize, right? So with coding, it gives you a lot of freedom. And what I mean by that is, when you want to do something, there's something that you're interested in doing, when you're something that you're interested in building, and if you know how to code, you don't have to go and get someone else to help you do that. You don't have to go and convince an engineer to help you to do that. You don't have to pay someone to do that. What you can do is do it yourself, right? So it really gives you a lot of freedom to explore, to really build the things that are in your head, and also just to explore a lot of things in ways that is really not possible unless you know how to code. There's a lot more flexibility in your tool set. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that, but this is why I think everybody should learn how to code. Of course, I am biased in that regard, but I just think it's a natural extension if you're interested in data, if you're interested in anything that's related with engineering, with technology. So moving on. The way that I like to see this is, let me just give you a little bit of my philosophy first, right? Like, I believe it's just technical projects specifically, they should be very, how do I say it? They should be very focused on the project. Like, coding is a skill set. It's not something that you sit there and memorize. It's not something that you just try to accumulate knowledge about. And it's actually quite different from many fields that are not skill set based. So what I recommend doing is to really learn the basics that you need to know, and then just immediately start working on projects. And that way you're able to really learn how to implement the things that you're learning. And then that's how you can also upgrade and get better at coding by doing more and more projects that are interesting and more complex. So in the very beginning, before you start your first project, I recommend that you learn these different things. And the language that I recommend that you learn in is Python. And the reason for this is because Python is extremely intuitive. It's a very high-level language, lots of great documentation, and also very flexible. If you're interested in data, you can use Python with data. If you're interested in more engineering aspects, more interested in development, you can do everything you want with Python. And these are the things that I think you should start off by learning, which is variables, data types, loops, functions, if statements, and object-oriented programming. And how is it that you're going to learn this? So here are some of the resources that I recommend you do this in. Don't worry, everything I listed there, they're not like things that are really obscure. Like, this is really the introduction to computer science that you would usually get if you're taking a class in university or something like that. I personally really like going with interactive platforms like Free Code Camp, for example, or Code Academy. And the reason is because it's a lot closer to what coding actually feels like. You're able to put something in and get an immediate result back. Of course, you don't have to go with that. I also have recommendations in terms of books that you can learn from, and also a course. Full disclosure, I personally don't like learning from books. I have a very short attention span, can't focus. So I have heard, though, some really good things about Learn Python 3 the hard way, as well as Python Crash Course. And then the course Programming for Everybody, I did take some modules of this course, and I have done like a mini review of it previously, and I think it's quite good. And of course, you can audit it for free on Coursera. Okay, so a little bit of tips on how to go about doing this. As I was mentioning earlier, don't try to learn everything. Don't try to memorize stuff. Coding is a skill set. You don't have to try to remember everything, exactly understand everything. It's more about getting that overview, because the real learning itself begins when you start working on a project. And another piece of recommendation is always be curious and experiment. If, for example, you're like, oh, I have this variable over here, like what happens if I do this to the variable? How is the variable constructed? Try to experiment a little bit more. Do it based upon like doing as opposed to absorbing information. And to learn all the stuff that I talked about previously, all these things, if you're allocating around like 3 or 4 hours a day, I would say you should be completely fine in covering all the basics within 2 weeks. And then after you do that comes the actual fun part, which is choosing your first project. So my recommendation for this is that you should always start with something that is interesting to you and useful to you. And you should start small. So interesting and useful, because if you're not interested in it, and you definitely will run into issues and you can't figure it out, you will be very not motivated to actually fix your problems, and then you will probably give up. So if you're interested and you find it useful, that will give you a lot more motivation to actually figure out your project and actually do it. And starting small, like, we don't have to start off and try to build an entire social media network, for example, right? We try to do something that's really small, and then we can build up from there. So now let's talk about some of the project ideas that I have for you guys. So one of the very common ones that people like doing is a game. So for example, here we have poker, and implementing poker game in code it's a simple project, but it allows you to practice so many of the aspects of coding, including object-oriented programming, for example, including just a lot of the logical statements. You also touch upon how to use some data structures as well. And then you're also, by doing this, it helps you like think about how a game can actually be broken down into its subcomponents and how they can be built up on top of it. Another good reason is because there's been a lot of projects that have already been done on the internet with their source code completely free. So if you do get stuck, you can always go and look at those resources as well to help you along. Obviously, don't go and copy other people's code, because that doesn't help you learn at all. But it's nice because it's small and people have done it before, so you can always use those as references. Another one I would recommend is a stock trading bot. So this is something that's a little bit more data oriented. And me, myself, I'm quite interested in trading. So when you start off, right, you don't have to go and just create your entire bot, right? What you can do is you can just first have an array, just have a collection of different price data. You can think about doing some technical analysis. For example, you can just do some moving averages, or you can go and do something like RSI, and then have very simple logical statements like, oh, if RSI is greater than or equal to 70 or something, then you should probably sell. If RSI is less than or equal to 30, then you should probably buy. And you can have that output of just sell and buy. And in the beginning, right, it's a small project. You can actually manually go and do the trading yourself. You don't have to connect that to the actual trading platform, but it's a very good starting project, and it lets you practice small portions of how to manipulate data in different like lists where different data types, and then allow you to build up from there as well. So I would recommend this project. I've done this one personally as well myself. It was quite fun. And then after you do that, what you should learn, part 2. Next coming up, so you already have all the basics, you did your first project, and now it's about how to improve those projects, like how you can learn more and make your projects even better. So what I recommend that you learn is data structures, algorithms, how to use APIs, as well as how to debug when there's issues, and how to read documentation. Because when you're coding, the best way is not to write everything yourself from scratch, but to use other people's code. And in order to do that, you have to understand how to read their documentation so you know how to use their code. Again, well, with all these things that are covered, it's really, really easy to find these resources. The ones that I mentioned earlier, they usually have a secondary module where it's like one big module that covers all of these topics already. So nothing I'm saying here is out of the ordinary at all. It's covered in pretty much all introductory classes. So after you do that, you can continue on some other project ideas. You can actually continue on with that trading bot example, so you can actually make it into a full trading bot. So remember how before we were like, okay, we have like this list of data that we put in, and then we can do some manipulations, and it's going to spit out a sell or a buy. Well, now, because you know how to use APIs and you can read documentations, you're able to interface that with the software of a broker, for example. And you're actually able to take that real life data and then do your manipulations, do all that logic, and then output the sell or buy order. And with the sell or buy order, you can then link it again to the broker, so you can actually execute that. And then you come full circle in that way, and that is actually your minimal trading bot. only word of advice is to not go and trade with your real money first, because you might accidentally have data error and lose all your money, and that would be bad. So definitely start off with using like paper money, like just try it out doing simulations and stuff. But that's it, right? Like this is, you have a version of a bot just by doing that. And it's, if you're interested in trading, this is something that's like super interesting, because then you can then improve upon it in terms of the logic of what you're doing. What is it that you're executing your orders on, and just improving it from more of a data perspective as opposed to from an engineering perspective. All right, another one I would recommend doing in terms of a project is maze algorithms. And these are great because when you're learning algorithms, this is a really cool visual way for you to see how these algorithms actually function. So you have a maze that's happening, and there are certain algorithms like Dijkstra's, for example, or Bellman Ford. And this is, it's a way for the algorithm to figure out how to traverse through this maze in the shortest path possible. So it's really fun. Again, a lot of projects, if you just Google maze algorithms Python, lots and lots of projects have already been done on it. And it's a really cool visual way of seeing how the algorithm works. And again, you can actually improve this yourself as well. You're like, okay, like this is what the algorithm did, but you know, there's actually a better way of doing it. So you can start trying to improve on that, try to use different algorithms and see what happens from there. Next up, because we are talking about data science and this is a data science conference, I think that in terms of data science wise, which I should also cover some of the things you can do in terms of data science projects. So for data science, I would say things that you should start off by knowing after you cover all the basics is some modules that are data science specific, such as NumPy, pandas, and then also choosing a visualization is the beginning step. I listed some examples here like Matplotlib, Plotly, and Seaborn. There's a lot of different visualization modules. You don't have to learn all of them. You can just choose one. Personally, I actually prefer Seaborn because I think it's really pretty. That's pretty much the only reason, but a lot of people do prefer Plotly, for example. And then I would recommend just trying out doing some exploratory data analysis. I do have an entire video that's dedicated to this if you're interested. Small plug from me, but also because this is a 10-minute presentation that covers all the other topics if you want to start doing machine learning, for example. If you want to do like databases, these are all things that you can learn. But I think what I listed here is the minimum in which you can actually do a project in data science. And what's a good project to do? One of the really cool, simple, easy ones is a sentiment analysis one. I also did this myself. You can look this up on my GitHub. Just search my name on GitHub, and then I have all the source code for it. And what I did was I took YouTube comments from my own channel as well as other people's channels, and then I used a sentiment analysis, which is an ML algorithm, which you can usually call using an API because you learned about APIs previously. And then you're able to get the sentiment, like how good or bad the sentiment is for specific comments, and you can do some really cool visualizations and classifications based upon that. So this is also a really good beginner project that I would recommend that you can start off with. And like any other project, you can start improving it, say, oh, like this sentiment is not very good because of the way that the language is written, right? So you can consider training it using different types of data. You can also consider, okay, like, you know, this sentiment, like it has like these certain aspects to it. Like how can we restructure the data in a way that it's better for the algorithm? Or can we use a different algorithm so that I can get better sentiment analysis results based upon that specific data set? So lots and lots of things that you can do to improve on as well. Cool. And then finally, I just wanted to end with some projects that if anybody out here is in the job search, job hunt, I wanted just to also include some projects that you can do, which I think is extremely beneficial in you getting a job. At least I can say for myself, the reason how I managed to get my job has a lot to do with me working on real life projects that had real life impact, which then was perceived as me having experience in that field compared to when all the other new grads who were doing a lot of personal projects, right? Like projects I mentioned before, which are really cool, really fun, but they didn't really have impact in their real life. So I think if you're a student, especially where you're someone who don't have a lot of experience in this field, what can really set you apart is working on projects that are just that actually have real world impact. And it shows that you're able to collaborate with people and actually produce things that are not just, you know, you sitting there making your own personal project and putting it on your GitHub. So really briefly, some examples of this. If you're a student, research is amazing. Like this is how I personally got got my start in terms of real life impact. Go to some of the professors in your school. Just be like, hey, can I do research for you? Do some data analysis. I'll do it for free. generally say yes because you're doing it for free. And then they'll probably just give you some data, and then you can do some research with them. Maybe you can get a publication out of it. At least you can get a referral out of it. And that really is like a stepping stone towards getting a job. Another example was pro bono consulting. This is also something that's very, very common on university campuses. There's usually partnerships with different companies, and then you can consult in terms of taking the data and then advising companies on how it is that they can improve their current structure, how it is that they can save costs, how it is that they can increase revenue. And this is also an example of how your analytical skills was able to then improve a real life company. And then finally, this is for everybody, go to meetups, like something like DATAcated, for example. This is how you meet a lot of different people who are working on different projects. And you might find that somebody is, hey, looking to hire someone, or maybe they just want to work on a project, looking to someone to work on that project with. And once you start that networking process, when you meet these different people, really opportunities start coming. You start to see that it's not like I have to get a job, so I just start applying for jobs. Like there's a lot more nuance into that. Just putting yourself out there, networking, going to these meetups, you'll find that there's lots and lots of opportunities out there. And eventually that will lead you to a job. I have full faith in that. So that comes to the end of my presentation, actually. I hope I was doing good in terms of time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tina. That was a phenomenal presentation. So many insights there. Guys, you have no more excuses. If you're looking for projects to do and you missed a session, just watch Tina's session again. So many great ideas for projects. Tina, a few questions for you. And I'll start with a question that I was thinking about is, what was your first project in data?
That's a great question. Mine was in research, definitely in research. It was, let me think back to it. You know, I started off in pharmacology, which is the study of drugs. I was not in bioinformatics at that time. I was actually pre-med, wanted to be a doctor, but then I realized I would be a terrible doctor. Anyways, I was doing wet lab, and then there's a lot of data that was coming in. And the first project for me was I pretty much had all this data, and it was taking me forever to fix it and do stuff in an Excel spreadsheet. And I was like, oh dear Lord, there has to be a better way of doing this. So then I was like, okay, gotta learn Python. So then I learned a little bit of Python, and then I automated the data analysis for that spreadsheet. That was like how I got my first start. And then I went on to do more projects, primarily in the biology space, and then moving on to bioinformatics.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's always great for people who are looking for a job to hear these inspirational stories of, you know, how you can do your own personal projects to show a company that you have this experience before you actually have experience, which I know is a little tricky of what comes first. Another question here from George, and he's asking, you know, what part of coding would you rather outsource? Is there anything that you don't really enjoy doing?
That's a great question. For me, so, oh wow, I feel like we're gonna get some, if anybody who is doing my master's with me, please don't come after me. I did a computer science master's degree, and most of the people who did that master's degree went on to become software engineers. Me personally, I don't really like doing the development aspect of things. I like the building stuff part, you know, the boilerplate code, and also just like thinking about how to construct things isn't super interesting to me. I like it when the data, like, you know, getting the data and trying to figure out the insight portion. So it's pretty much everything that comes before getting the data insights and like pushing the insights through so that they actually create impact is what I would love to outsource.
Okay, all right, awesome, thank you. Question here from Priscilla. She's asking, do you have any tips on how to present a portfolio with your projects?
Yeah. So I see a portfolio as something that is complementary to your resume, right? It shouldn't replace your resume. And your resume is about telling a story, right? Like, this is who you are, these are the skills that you have, and the story of who you are. Your portfolio should do something similar. It should exemplify some of the things that you talk about in your resume. You're like, oh, I'm very interested in, I don't know, like, what is that people are interested in these days? I don't know, in sports, right? Then you have a project in sports analytics, something like that. Then that really showcases the fact that you're interested in sports. So you think about it as like kind of a storytelling as well. How are these projects, how do they relate to who you are? And then how to present that in a way so that it also tells a story in terms of the progress that you've been through, and then also where you see yourself in the future. So when you're presenting a portfolio, I also highly recommend not just being like, hey, I did this project and just like slap it on, but talk about how you can actually improve that project, right? Because projects that are always living things. Think about so your employer, they're actually seeing you're not just like doing projects for the sake of that. It's about how to like improve that in the future, what your plans are in terms of improving it.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. We do have several more questions that are coming in on LinkedIn if you have the time to go in there and sort of answer them in the chat. But also, I wanted to ask you about the link. You said you had a video link to a longer video about this topic. If you want to share that on LinkedIn as well, I think that would be really helpful.
I'm going to ask a really noob question about how do I do that?
Okay, I'll send you a link offline on LinkedIn so I show you how to do that.
All right, yeah,
Awesome.
I'll be happy to.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Tina.